Everything we've been doing in this series has been orbiting one truth. Even when we weren't saying it out loud, Monster Hunter Wilds isn't a story about discovering a new continent. It's a story about discovering that the world you thought you knew has been living beside a buried heartbeat for 2,000 years, and that heartbeat is speeding up again. The Forbidden Lands aren't the frontier, they're the aftermath. They're the place where the ancient catastrophe never really ended. Just learn to breathe quietly. Episode 10 is where we put all the pieces down on the table at once and draw the clean line from the first spark of Wyveria to the question the modern world has to answer now. Not as a bullet list, not as a museum tour, as a living arc, the way Wilds itself wants you to feel it. A timeline of choices, feedback loops, and survival philosophies colliding inside a machine world that doesn't care about any story except the one spelled into its program. Before we bring it home, quick, sincere pause. If you've been enjoying this full-length Wild season and you want more Monster Hunter lore like this on the channel, a like and a subscribe really do help keep the series rolling. It tells YouTube that long, story-first deep dives are worth pushing, and it lets me keep making them at this length without cutting corners. And please drop a comment with what other games or series you want next in this same style. I'm building the next roadmaps right now, and your picks shape where we go after Wilds. All right, let's stitch the world back together. To understand Wilds' timeline, we start a long time before Nata, before Arkveld, even before the Guild. We start with the simplest human impulse that turns into the most dangerous one when power is infinite. The desire to make life stable. Wyveria didn't build the Dragon Torch because its people were cartoon villains. They built it because they were brilliant, ambitious, and living in a world where nature was overwhelming. The Monster Hunter world is not gentle. It is a planet where weather can kill you, where apex predators behave like natural disasters, and where elder-level presences can rewrite a region simply by arriving. Civilizations don't rise in that environment unless they learn to carve out stability somehow. Wyveria found a way. The Dragon Torch wasn't just a power source in the modern sense. It was a solution to scarcity, a promise that hunger and cold and fear could be engineered into something manageable. It was the heart of a new kind of human dream. Not to survive by reacting to nature, but to survive by tuning nature's dials. At first, the dream worked. The landspine distributed the torch's bioenergy through the continent like arteries. Wilk became the medium of that distribution, a kind of living fuel that fed both infrastructure and ecology. This is a detail people sometimes miss. Wyveria didn't separate city and wild, it fused them. Energy wasn't only for buildings, it was for life itself. It regulated climate phases, it fertilized crops, it stabilized migration routes. It made the continent into a managed organism where humans could predictably live. But the moment you manage an ecosystem with infinite energy, you create a second problem alongside the first. Energy changes everything. It accelerates growth, it accelerates competition, it accelerates the rise of dominance nodes. Wherever energy concentrates, apex monsters grow more powerful, more territorial, more likely to hoard influence. This is not a moral issue, it's a physical one. If you pour high-density bioenergy into nature, nature will respond by producing high-density predators. So Wyveria's first great solution created its first great risk: runaway dominance. Wyveria understood that risk. The evidence for that understanding is all around us in Wilds. It built stabilizer layers like a civilization building levees for a river it knows can flood. The phase system was the first levee: scarcity, storm, pressure, abundance, recovery. A continent-wide rhythm designed to make apex crowns rotate rather than lock in place. The Scarlet Forest's purge floods were another levee because basin biomes trap energy too efficiently without extra vents. Living regulators like Arkveld were another levee because sometimes crowns still rise too hard, too fast for weather and water to contain. Guardian armies were another levee to hold local integrity when cells began slipping. Every one of these layers says the same thing. Wyveria anticipated the spiral and tried to engineer a way to keep it below catastrophe. And for a time, that engineering worked too. But you can feel the next step coming because it is how every empire handles success with power it believes it controls. It expands. Buildings grow taller. Infrastructure grows denser. Energy output increases. Artificial tools become more specialized. The managed world becomes more managed. The line between stability tool and domination tool gets thinner every generation because the tools keep working. Those tools working is the problem. The stabilizer isn't designed to stop human temptation. It's designed to stop ecological runaway. So as Wyveria scaled up, it pushed pressure up too. The phase system had to vent harder, purge floods had to sweep more often, Arkveld had to trim more aggressively. Guardian patrols had to become more numerous and more decisive. At some point, for reasons the game deliberately leaves half in the shadows, the stabilizer climbed too many rungs too fast. The lower layers were no longer enough to keep dominance and energy hoarding below the threshold. Maybe elders were drawn to the Dragon Torch's pulse. Maybe Apex Arms' races outpaced corrective cycles. Maybe artificial guardians began competing with natural apexes in a way the system wasn't calibrated for. Maybe humans themselves became the largest hoarding node by pushing the torch closer to its ceiling. Wilds doesn't need to tell you which exact strand snapped first for the logic to hold, because it shows you what always happens when a feedback spiral reaches the edge. The last failsafe wakes. Zoshia was built for that moment, the Doomsday Guardian. The creature designed not to manage an ecosystem, but to reset it if management failed. Its role was brutally simple. If pressure ever spiked into a runaway state that threatened the continent, release the one entity capable of absorbing the grid's excess energy directly and crushing dominance nodes faster than they could rise. In other words, if the system is about to explode from hoarded power, wake what can swallow power. Wyveria built Zoshia as an emergency answer, but by the time the emergency arrived, Wyveria had already become part of the emergency. The Empire had become a permanent dominance node, a civilization that could not rotate its crown because it was the crown. The last failsafe did what last failsafes do. It activated. It fed. It grew beyond control. It interpreted the most dangerous imbalance the way its programming demanded. And Wyveria was erased by its own reset philosophy. This is why the ruins of Wyveria feel different from other ancient ruins in Monster Hunter. They don't feel like a civilization that fell from weakness. They feel like a civilization that fell from its strength, turning into pressure. Now the timeline crosses the threshold that defines everything afterward. The fall. The Dragon Torch heart didn't go out. It fractured. The land spine didn't stop. It broke into leaking arteries. Wilk didn't vanish. It began pooling erratically in biomes. Guardian factories didn't shut down neatly. Their creations survived beyond context. The stabilizer layers didn't retire. They kept running without a hand on the dial. This is the key understanding Wilds gives us that reshapes the whole franchise. Wyveria's collapse did not end its machine world. It left it half alive. A living program without operators is the most dangerous kind, because it keeps doing its job even when the job no longer makes sense. 2,000 years pass. To the old world, the East becomes a myth, and then a policy, and then a blank map. The Guild forms in the West as a cultural immune response to ancient overreach. It builds rules and a hunting order to prevent itself from becoming Wyveria. It teaches restraint through regulation. It bans technologies that smell like old hubris. It spreads a philosophy of balance that is basically a human substitute for a stabilizer. But the Forbidden Lands are not the old world. They are the machine world's heartland. Their ecology never fully returned to pre-Wyverian baseline because the baseline had been rewritten by centuries of phased energy regulation. The land still cycles, storms still vent, plenty still blooms, purge floods still flush basins. It just does all this in a damaged loop with rising intensity whenever pressure spikes. Humans survive there anyway. That's the miracle and the warning embodied in the Keepers. They are not primitive survivors. They are descendants of a civilization that learned the wrong lesson and then learned a different one by trauma. When Wyveria died, because it tried to dominate nature with power, the Keepers survived by doing the inverse. They built a culture of listening to phases rather than forcing them. They negotiated with the land through chimes and timing. They refused to tap the grid as fuel even when it could make their lives easier. Instead of founding a new empire, they founded restraint as identity. So the timeline splits into two human branches after the fall, the Guild in the West surviving through regulated hunting, and the Keepers in the East surviving through humility toward a machine world. These two branches never had the chance to meet until Wilds, because while the old world stabilized into an uneasy balance, the Forbidden Lands kept simmering. The stabilizer ladder kept climbing whenever pressure rose. Some centuries would be calmer, some would be harsher, but the machine never fully healed and so it never fully stopped preparing to reset again. Wilds begins at the precise moment simmer becomes boil. That moment is marked by symptoms across every level we've explored. Storm phases intensify and grow less forgiving. That is the atmosphere telling you grid pressure is rising. Plenty windows feel compressed and more frantic. That is recovery being forced to happen faster than it should. Purge floods in basins like the scarlet forest turn red more violently. That is the system venting excess energy harder just to stay below a runaway threshold. Apex ladders accelerate and rotate aggressively, producing storm specialist rulers like Ray Dow in faster, wilder cycles. That is dominance competition feeding on surplus energy. Then Arkveld wakes, and that is the scalpel layer of the stabilizer saying, pressure has passed the point weather and water can contain. Arkveld is not a random invader. It is a failsafe designed for exactly this era of rising pressure. But Arkveld wakes into a world with no Wyverian steering, no calibrated thresholds, and no command. So it hunts apex nodes bluntly, siphoning energy and leaving vacuums behind. Those vacuums are filled by new apex spikes faster than nature can settle them. Arkveld's loop, meant to slow the spiral, begins to tighten it. At the same time, broader Guardian units surface. That is the security layer stepping closer to the surface because the surface is no longer stable enough to contain the system's own stress patterns. These Guardians distort natural ecology, accelerating dominance contests and making phase corrections harsher. Every ladder rung is firing. The only rung left above all this is Xochitl, which is why Wilds feels like it is humming with endgame dread even before you know the name. The land is trying to avoid waking the last layer, and the last layer is what once ended civilization. Then Nata appears, the human catalyst that makes the modern world collide with the ancient one. Nata is not just a child who needs rescue, he is a living contradiction to the old world narrative, proof that humans survived in the East without the Guild, proof that the Forbidden Lands are not empty, proof that the machine world still shapes life. His testimony about the White Wraith is credible not because he's eloquent, but because the system itself is already showing stress symptoms that would make Arkveld's awakening plausible. The Guild mobilizes the Avis unit quickly because at some level it already understands the category of what's happening. The quarantine policy is failing, pressure is rising. If the East resets catastrophically, the West will eventually feel the fallout. The Guild can't remain a bystander. So, the Avis unit steps into the Forbidden Lands under the banner of rescue and investigation. In practice, it is also a systems audit of a continent the Guild has avoided for centuries. It is the Guild reopening Wyveria's crime scene because the smoke is pouring out again. This is where Wilds becomes a story about whether history repeats. The Guild walks into a machine world with tools of intervention and a philosophy built to prevent overreach. The Keepers live inside the machine world with a philosophy built to prevent temptation. Those two human strands meet at the exact moment the stabilizer ladder is climbing. The tension of Wilds is not, can we kill Arkveld? The tension is, can humans act here without becoming part of the imbalance? Because the stabilizer doesn't care about intention. It cares about dominance spikes and energy flow distortions. If the Guild solves problems too forcefully, it could trigger deeper corrections. If it begins tapping Wilk as a resource, it could become a new hoarding node. If it tries to manipulate phases and optimize the system, it could reenact Wyveria's first steps toward hubris. At the same time, if the Guild refuses to intervene at all, it risks allowing pressure to climb to Xochitl regardless. The system is already on the ladder. Doing nothing might simply mean letting the ladder reach the top unopposed. So Wilds traps humans between two dangers: intervention that risks repetition, and passivity that risks reset. This is why Nata matters so much, and why Episode 3 wasn't a detour. Nata is the bridge between philosophies. He is a keeper child learning to trust a hunter, and a hunter team learning to listen before forcing. He is the opinion of the land made human. Strength without humility wakes monsters worse than the ones you fight. That's the reason Wilds feels like a shift in the franchise. It isn't telling you to stop hunting. It's telling you hunting is not enough when the landscape itself is an engineered feedback system. In a machine world, balance is not restored by force alone. It's restored by understanding the machine's thresholds, respecting its rhythms, and intervening with precision rather than dominance. In other words, the guild has to become something Wyveria never became, powerful and restrained at the same time. Now, we pull the thread all the way to the end. What stops the Forbidden Lands from repeating Wyveria's fall isn't a bigger weapon or a stronger hunter. It's a change in how humans relate to the stabilizer ladder. The stabilizer ladder exists to keep runaway dominance from destroying the system. The ladder is climbing because pressure is rising. Pressure is rising because the grid is damaged, energy is leaking unevenly, and dominance nodes are spiking faster than corrections can settle them. So, to prevent a doomsday reset, humans have to reduce pressure without becoming pressure. That means 3 practical philosophical moves, whether characters say them explicitly or not. First, align with phases rather than trying to dominate them. Hunt's time to phase windows that minimize vacuum making, interventions that reduce spikes without igniting larger contests. This is the guild learning from the Keeper's listening practice. Second, treat Wilk and Landspine flow as hazardous medicine, not as resource bounty. If humans begin extracting and hoarding Wilk, they will become a new Wyverian-class spike. The only safe relationship with infinite energy is restraint. Third, recognize the difference between natural apex rotation and artificial dominance distortion. Killing an apex in wilds is not a neutral act. It is a lever on the machine. The lever can be pulled, but only with awareness of how the system will compensate. If the guild internalizes those moves, if it truly becomes a third path between Wyverian hubris and Keeper survivalism, then the stabilizer ladder doesn't need to climb to Zoshia. The fever comes down. Arkveld's loop can settle or be put back under calibrated containment. Guardian units can be deactivated or left dormant. Storms and purges can return to safer rhythms. If the guild fails to internalize those moves, Wilds is the prelude to a second fall. This is the true timeline Wilds gives us. A civilization built a machine to tame nature. The machine built a ladder to tame itself. The ladder erased the civilization when it became the spike. And now, 2 surviving human philosophies meet at the moment the ladder begins climbing again. That's not just lore. That's an argument about what Monster Hunter as a series might be becoming. Because for 20 years, the franchise has largely been about one idea. Humans survive a violent world by learning to hunt its strongest forces. The guild is the moral container for that survival. It regulates hunting, so it doesn't become extermination or conquest. The dance between hunter and monster is balance. Wilds adds a second idea. Sometimes the world you are hunting in is not purely natural. Sometimes it is a legacy system with a memory of catastrophe. In those worlds, hunting must be paired with humility toward infrastructure older than war. This doesn't reject the series, it deepens it. It says the future of Monster Hunter isn't stop hunting, it's hunt with a new kind of awareness. You can feel that future in how Wilds designs its fights around phases, herd movement, and environmental thresholds. The game is training hunters to think like ecosystem translators, not just apex slayers. It's making you live inside the stabilizer, rather than standing outside it. So when you ask what Wilds truly resolves by its end, the answer isn't, we killed the big monster. The answer is, we learned the real nature of the land we hunt in, and we chose not to become its next catastrophe. That is the best possible ending Wilds can gesture toward. A modern world that steps into Wyveria's ruins, sees the ladder, hears the Keeper's warning, and decides to stay powerful without letting power become hunger. And if that choice holds, then the Forbidden Lands can become something neither Wyveria nor the old world ever made. A living region where humans can survive beside infinite energy without trying to own it. A place where storms remain a rhythm, not a weapon. Where purge floods remain a vent, not a wound. Where Arkveld becomes a cautionary relic again instead of a roaming scalpel. Where Zoshia stays asleep because the ladder never needs to reach it. But the story doesn't pretend that's easy. It doesn't pretend the temptation is gone. The dragon torch still exists, the landspine still pulses, Wilk still glitters like a promise. When you put infinite power under human hands, the question never ends. It just waits for the next generation. That's why Wilds ends less like a sealed victory and more like a door left open on purpose. The Forbidden Lands are still alive, the ladder is still there. The future depends on whether the third path becomes a culture, not just a moment. So if we summarize the entire 10-episode timeline in one breath, it's this: Wyveria engineered stability. Stability engineered pressure, pressure engineered ladders, ladders engineered collapse, survivors engineered humility, and now the modern world must decide whether to engineer a future that doesn't need another reset. That's Wilds, not a new continent, but a second chance.